Hey guys and gals, welcome back to another Monday evening live stream. Tonight I've got James Bierbrauer, actually from I think he said the UK. I hope I'm right on that one. He'll correct me in a second if I'm wrong. We're talking about kingdom structure, or the foundations principle, how to achieve real change and transformation in any area of life. If you've watched any of these Monday evening live streams in the past or listened to the audios when they came out on the podcast, you know that real change and transformation is an absolutely perfect topic for this show. Before we get into that, though, I want to invite you to check out my new podcast called Finding the Next Level. It goes along with my Next Level Men's Mentoring, Coaching, Mastermind program. It's a year long. Check it out. It's 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday. They're 2 to 5 minutes long, talking about all the ways, things that you can do to help you reach the next level of growth and impact personally, professionally, and spiritually. Go check it out. I'd love if you listen. If you like it, leave a rating and a review. If you don't, I guess you can still leave a rating and a review. Just don't be too hard on me, but I can take it. So no worries. Anyway, I'm going to invite James on to the show. James, how's it going?
Man. Good, man. How are you?
Doing great. Was I right or was I wrong on where you're from?
You were half right, actually.
Half
that's
right.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So half German, actually. Half German, half English.
That's right. Okay. But where are you? Where do you live full time?
I live in the south of Germany right now.
Okay. You did tell me that the other day, and I'm not sure where I pulled UK out of. I apologize about that. But
well, like I said, you're half right. My mum's from England, and I went to
Gotcha.
university there, so it's not an insult.
Okay. So tell me, what time of day do you have there now?
It is 2 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, man, 2 a.m. Man, kudos to you for being up and at 'em early and being willing to join me at this time of the night for you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. And it helps having little kids. So, being up at this time of night just isn't new to me right now.
Yeah, I'm sure. And when they're sleeping at this time, I guess you can maybe get more work done at night.
I could theoretically, yeah. But I'm going to do this. I'm going to enjoy this. And then I'm going to go back to bed for a couple of hours.
I don't blame you. After I get off of here, I'll be heading to bed too. So it'll be 8 o'clock or so when we finish up my time. But why don't you tell us who James Bierbrauer is? Give us a little of your background and kind of how you came to be who you are today.
Yeah. Well, like I said, half German, half English, born and raised in Germany, studied in the UK, studied a business degree. And then moved halfway across the world, lived in South Africa for 6 years, and then came back to Germany. So I'm married now. I have 2 little kids, a boy and a girl. And just kind of like the, basic data, basic rundown, born into I would say like a semi-Christian home. Mum was definitely a believer. Dad was a believer, but not so much practicing, just because he had a rough start in life, really. And the big thing really to know about my life, and this will make sense then when we get into the interview a little bit later, is that I've just always had this borderline obsession with understanding why things are the way they are and why things work the way they are. And that's tied very closely to wanting to understand purpose from God's perspective. And that is something which is so deep in me. And that kind of followed me from an early age. So when I was 16, I wasn't, surrendered to the Lord yet. I wasn't walking with Jesus, but I knew he was real. I knew he was there, and I knew he was calling me. But I was making my decision on where to go and study. And, I was still praying. I was still asking for wisdom. I was still asking for his guidance, despite having gone the year before, like, I'm not going to follow you right now. And so long story short, that all changed, gave my life to Christ. And after university, big personal crisis, family kind of fell apart. And I was really, really desperate, looking to God for for clarity on my purpose, on his plan for my life. And about 9 months later, after having, just a cataclysmic event, I was at the lowest point in my life, deeply depressed, caught in addictions, but still reaching out to God for his plan for my life. And I just said, look, I want to know what it is. I want to do this, but I can't figure this out by myself. I'm tired of trying. My life's a mess. You need to do it. And so 9 months later, I found myself in South Africa through a whole bunch of God coincidences and God arrangements. And he started answering that question. And that's really where, my walk really kicked off and some exciting stuff happened.
That's awesome. I love hearing people's stories, like kind of some of the events that led them to the change and brought them to becoming the person that they are today. You said something that I want to pull on a little bit.
Sure.
You said at one point, you said, God, I'm not ready to follow you yet. Was there an event or what flipped that switch for you to make the decision to follow God?
I would say I've had 2 or 3 of those moments. So the first one was I was about 15, preacher in church, preached a sermon like a good old classic Baptist. Hey, here's the gospel, here's sin, here's repentance. And I knew the message was for me, and my heart just was beating in my chest. But because of the area that we grew up in and the people I was around, it came with a lot of legalism as well. So I was like, okay, this is going to mean no fun, no more joy. I'm just going to, all I heard was die to self. But then I experienced some of that so-called fun. And it just, it wasn't as bad as other people's stories, and I didn't go completely wild, but, I lived a little, and just a couple of things happened all over the course of 1 year, which made me realize both the emptiness of what I had held up as being like this, this awesome lifestyle that I was trying to protect from Jesus. And a couple of bad things happened that could have gone a lot worse, So I was caught in an avalanche while snowboarding.
Wow.
And miraculously, nothing happened. Just got dragged down the hill a couple of 100 yards, and that was it.
Oh, wow. But that was terrifying.
It was overwhelming. It was like suddenly, you're in the middle of this thing and you have in a split second, everything's changing and you have no power control. So where the snow's going, you're going.
Yeah.
But I had another event like that where I was like, okay, yeah, Jesus, I don't want to be in charge of my life anymore. And so I didn't have this big, altar call response. It was just in my bedroom on my knees, May 17th, 2005. Remember it quite clearly. I was like, okay, Jesus, we're doing this your way now.
That's awesome.
So that was one of those moments where, I got to experience the thing that I was afraid of losing, and I realized it really wasn't worth holding on to.
Mm-hmm. It's some of those events. I mean, there's no describing it to somebody who's never experienced that. Either the near death and being face to face, like, okay, I'm not going to be here in about 2 seconds, or the complete helplessness, like you said, you experienced in the avalanche. Like, there's nothing I can do to save myself. And that's just a small picture of what the reality of life is. Like, without God, I mean, we think we're in control, but once you reach the end of your life, if you haven't lived, given yourself to God, lived for Him, you have no control over that. And that's a beautiful picture of it. You also mentioned something. You talked about finding purpose from a biblical view, and I know we'll probably get into some of that. Does it get too far ahead if I ask you how you define purpose, especially from a biblical view?
No, not at all. So that was actually that second big moment in my life, because I couldn't tell you, 2009, I graduated from business school. I couldn't tell you what purpose really meant or what it looked like. I just knew that God had a plan and a purpose for my life. And it was making me seriously angry because I felt like there was this thing that I had to live for, but I couldn't define it any further than that. And again, it's that helplessness. It's that it's bigger than me, realizing now in hindsight, it's like me as the creation trying to play creator. Doesn't work. But so anyway, so in terms of a definition, no, it doesn't get ahead. I think there are probably three components to the way I now define purpose. Our purpose, first and foremost, is Genesis 1:26. God made us in his image and likeness. And so I believe that we are called and destined and purposed to be like God in very individual and unique and distinct ways. So that's the first thing I would say. It's be who God created you to be. But that means you need to go on a journey of discovery. Like not just, hey, I'm a child of God, I'm a follower of Christ, and, less of me and more of him. All of that stuff is true. But in this sense, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about saying, God, when you look at me, what do you see? And when I become more like Christ, what does that look like in terms of just my existence? Yeah, character, but how does that come out through my gifting, my personality? We talk about having a creational mandate. God always intended for man to co-create with him. And so that was way before sin, and that was way before the fall, and that was way before the gospel and the Great Commission, which is the second part then. So if Adam and Eve had never sinned, they would have co-authored, co-created, and just been the way God wanted them to be. So yeah, that's kind of the one package. The second package I see is that Great Commission, where God, where Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything that I've taught you. And the third thing that I very much believe in, and this is where, it's theologically speaking, it's extra biblical. You need to have spent some time asking God about your purpose, and then you need him to give you a lens for scripture that allows this third definition. And that is very much that I believe we have a unique and distinct purpose, which is tailor-made for us. The Bible talks about he knows the good works that he has destined us to walk in. Jeremiah 29 talks about the plans and thoughts he has for us for our future. And if you then look at who God is not arbitrary. He's not, he doesn't do just things just for the sake of them. There's always rhyme and reason and purpose, and there is divine design. And so under getting to know God as someone who is very intentional and very specific and very detailed in what he does, means for me that we all have a purpose indicated by our individual design, our desires, our dreams, the gifts we've been given, personality, all of that stuff. But so if you look at that kind of as a 3 parts, 3-point triangle, it's that creational thing, it's the Great Commission, and then it's that individual purpose piece. Does that answer the question?
That does. It really does. It breaks it down. It's very similar to how I've described it. I've often said, I don't know if God gives us a specific thing to do in life, but I know he gives us passions and interests, a unique personality. He gives us different things that we enjoy doing. And I know that we are designed to use those to make a difference for other people. We may live them out differently from time to time. And so I've always been of the opinion that I don't know if there's something specific that I'm supposed to do. But while you were talking, I had to think of like a furniture maker.
Mm-hmm.
God makes us all unique. A furniture maker makes his pieces unique. Like each and every piece is carved for a specific purpose. And as I was thinking that through while you were talking, then you said, and God has a purpose for us, that kind of hit me. It's like, I've never thought that I have a specific path to walk, It's just using what God gives me. But if I apply that furniture maker metaphor to it, I have to go through the journey of finding that specific path now. So
Yeah.
I had a light bulb moment right there.
That's awesome. Well, and here's one thing which is a complete game changer, and that's the relational aspect, right? So I heard people talk about this, and now that I've had kids for a number of years, I can actually relate to this. I heard someone say that God, as a good father, like a good father, would get to know his kids, but he knows us perfectly anyway. But any good father would get to know their kids as they're growing up and would recognize the very things you just mentioned, like, hey, she's really passionate about this and she's really good at that, and she actually doesn't like that, and this is what consumes her, with like a righteous passion and all of that kind of stuff. And while every good dad would want their child to find their own way in life, that father would still have an outside perspective and go, hey, I really think that if you went and did this, that would be an awesome fit for you. So I see God having that kind of a conversation with us, or waiting to have that kind of a conversation where he goes, you can choose. Like I once heard Bill Johnson from Bethel say that the kingdom is not a tightrope walk. It's a very broad, expansive place. God's not going, you have to hit this spot after you've given your life to Jesus or else you're in trouble. It's like, no, you've got freedom. Like, it's a broad, open space. You can choose to do stuff. But I'm a good dad. I know you. And like you say, I am the furniture maker. And so I did have a very specific use intended for you when I made you, which is why I made you the way I did. And so, hey, let's sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So what is, in your notes, you mentioned the foundations principle. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that a little bit. What is the foundations principle?
So this has been super exciting going back over this, because God gave me this topic, and this takes me back to kind of my own origin story. So 2009, I asked God for purpose. 2010, God started speaking to me, and it was around about 2011 when this dropped. And so I'll tell you what it is. It's essentially, it's a complete upgrade to your thinking. It's a Romans 12:2 mind renewal process. And the way I see it, it's almost like God's brain comes down like this overlay, and overlays your entire brain and encompasses it if you allow it. And it will upgrade the way you think on every aspect of life. So we're right into change and transformation speak now, because Romans 12:2 says, don't conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? So it's revelation, but essentially to make it, it's a change and transformation powerhouse. And if you're, in the development space, if you're in the business development space, then the 80-20 rule will most certainly be, familiar to you and your listeners. And it really is like, it's the kingdom 80-20 lever. And actually, I think it sways more in favor of like 5-95, really. It's that one thing you do that moves significant mountains. And so the way God has explained it to me and shown it to me and built it up to me over the years, and the way I've seen it change people's lives and my own life, is essentially it's a way to affect massive change and transformation in any area of your life, which is a huge statement if it were coming from me. But seeing as it's coming from God and it's biblical, it's that's what it is.
Yeah. Awesome. So tell us what Romans 12:2 is. You mentioned that's where it originates from.
Well, actually that's not where it originated, but that's where God, showed me a lot about it.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, sure. So let me tell you where it originated, because it will make a lot more sense, and it will become very practical.
Perfect.
very tangible straight away. So I was doing non-profit work at the time in South Africa, which was at the time a passion of labor and a labor of love. That's what you call it. But there wasn't a lot of money in it. And I just needed...
Feels like often there's not in those kinds of things.
So I needed an additional income. And I ended up doing some consulting work for a friend of mine, had a small business, about 20 guys working for him. And he came to me and we were just having coffee and he went, can you help me just to get more discipline and more structure into my business? My staff aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're slacking. They're not motivated. So like a classic management consulting gig. And I went in, but I came at this from a completely different point of view because I just spent the year before that rediscovering business from God's perspective. And I'd spent a year more or less in my prayer closet and then going and doing training on this, but always with the question like, God, what was your purpose for business? And so that carried over into this new job. And I think it was within the first couple of days of me being on site, he told me about all these problems. He introduced me to the team. He introduced me to his manager. He showed me everything that wasn't working. And for him, it was the others. He was always going like, they're not performing, they're not working. That's where the issues. We need more productivity, effectiveness, time management, all of that kind of stuff. And so I just, the Holy Spirit prompted me to ask the following question. And that was very simply, God, what's really going on here? And this was 100% inspiration because God took me to Proverbs 29:18. And this is the origin of the Foundation's principle, where it says, where there's no vision, people cast off restraint.
What was that verse again?
Proverbs 29, verse 18.
Yes.
But God started me off reading the Amplified Bible. And the Amplified gives you a slightly different definition, which changes a lot. And it says, where there's no redemptive revelation of God and his will, people cast off restraint. And so what he started showing me right off the bat is this casting off restraint, that's symptomatic behavior, okay? Where you see employees not being efficient, not being productive, not getting the work done, not behaving in a desirable way, that's an example of casting off restraint. That's where you begin to, in a way, experience death, because other translations of that same verse say, where there's no vision, people perish, right? But then he showed me that the reason for it was no vision, or in the Amplified, a lack of redemptive revelation of God and his will. And so I was like, okay, wow. So we know this, right? There are symptoms, there are causes, there's fruit and there's root. But that's the first major connection that God established in my mind. And it got me asking that why question. So why are things not working then? And what redemptive revelation is missing in this company, which is producing these results and this behavior that my friend no longer wanted to see? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay. And so God showed me this next thing. After he initiated by giving me a question, he gave me a revelation. He gave me questions to go deeper. He gave me the answers to that. So I said, God, like, what redemptive revelation is missing and who's missing this revelation? And it very quickly became apparent that this friend of mine, the owner of the company, didn't understand his purpose and his role and his responsibility as a leader.
Wow.
And then I was like, but that wasn't deep enough. God was like, ask me why. So let's go deeper. And then it turned out that he didn't understand his role, responsibility as a head of a household. So, wow. We don't endlessly go down the rabbit hole, but this is where it starts connecting them, because he, as an individual, There were just certain things that he'd never been taught. There was certain revelation about who God is and about his purpose for life. Your purpose as a man, your purpose as a leader, your purpose as the head of the household. He was married, 3 kids. That was lacking, that was missing. And that was a foundational layer of revelation that he didn't have. So there was nothing stable and strong he could build on. So now, without this revelation, he's in a leadership position in a company where people are looking to him to give them practical vision. And what does that look like? They didn't have job descriptions. They didn't have job titles. All they had was an unspoken expectation from their boss, but he'd never gone up to them and he'd never said, this is why you're here. This is what you're meant to be doing. This is how I will help you get it done. Oh, and by the way, this is what the company does. This is our vision. This is our mission. And this is how you fit in. So that's very practical stuff, but it just wasn't there. Many of them didn't even have a contract. And so, you're looking at the problem and you're going, well, that's the problem. But what you're seeing are the symptoms, and God's going, no. That's the root, and that's why it's all happening.
Yeah.
So he wanted me to come in and basically deal with his crappy employees. And God just flipped the script on him and went, no, dude, we need
it's
to.
You.
Yeah. So that's where it started. And that's where Romans 12:2 then was brought in, because it is, don't conform to the patterns of this world. And the pattern of this world, sadly, is the blame game.
Yeah.
I will shirk responsibility. I will lay blame at everybody else's feet. But God goes, no, it starts with you. God goes with, hang on, what's my responsibility in this? So renew your mind, but don't just go, oh, I'm sorry for doing that. Understand how things work. That's what God wants. God doesn't want us to be ignorant. He wants us to understand the difference between symptom, cause, fruit, and root. And so he showed me, if you change the root, you change the fruit.
Wow, that's a good way to put that. I like that. Can you give me an example or a first step, somebody who is in business and maybe they're a lot smaller, have 1 or 2 employees. What's the first step towards finding or defining the purpose of the business?
Mm-hmm. Well, weaving in a couple of things. We know Genesis 1:26, 1:27, around there, made in his image and likeness. Sounds simple enough, really big if you actually start looking at it. What does that mean? Well, if God made us in his image and likeness, I need to understand who God is, right? 1 John 4 says God is love. And then if we look at 1 Corinthians 13, we get a definition of love. So that's just what came to mind. Defining the purpose of business, very simple. We were made to be like God. God is love. So our prime objective in life is to be loved by God, to reciprocate in love towards him, and to let that love overflow to other people. So your first job as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, from a kingdom perspective, from God's perspective, is not to make money, is not to solve problems. The first, that most foundational layer of revelation is you're here to love. Then, once you've got that established and squared away, then you can start working on some of the specifics. And then you can say, okay, so what's the purpose of business? Well, God created us within community. We're not completely self-sufficient. We're not islands that don't need each other. We have gifts that are mutually complementary. So even if you don't look at problems and needs, you just go, I have stuff that I'm really good at. You have stuff that you're really good at. So this basic definition of business was, you raise sheep. I make tables. I need wool for clothing, and I need, milk and meat, and you need tables. So let's trade. So that's that complementary aspect, very basically. But then if you just go through life and you see, hey, people have needs and desires, people have problems. So that adds a very specific dimension to what love looks like. Your purpose in business is to love other people by adding value to their lives And you do so by solving problems, by meeting needs, satisfying desires. And this is where it then becomes, I think the mature form of that is by drawing upon people's uniqueness and their gifts and their talents. So that is my definition of the purpose of business. The purpose of business is to love and serve other people by adding value. The way you do that is by solving problems, meeting needs, satisfying desires. And in an ideal scenario, it's not irrelevant who's doing the problem solving, but it's a very intentional choice to say, hey, Ken, you're really good at that. I want you to be exactly who God created you to be, and to add your unique blend of strengths and gifts and perspective and personality into this team so that we can do that together.
Yeah. That's well said, well spoken. What's been your personal experience? How have you applied that in your own life, or how has that principle affected your work, your now coaching business, and your previous work? What's been your personal experience there?
So that, in terms of working with people, this has completely revolutionized from the bottom up my approach to everything. So it is that doctor's mindset, right? If you have an issue, you go to the doctor. A good doctor won't just look at the symptoms you're presenting with, but they will understand where those symptoms are originating. And they might give you some tactics, essentially, to manage the symptoms temporarily. But the real approach should be, let's fix the cause. Let's fix the root cause, because knowing that, it will change everything else. So as soon as God showed me this foundations principle, and he showed me within a business setting, my whole approach to consultancy changed for the next 5 years. My approach to training people up on kingdom business, my approach to coaching now has been very openly speaking to the issue, discerning between, and actually telling people what you're experiencing here is a symptom. Because management consultancy is a huge, I don't know how many billion-dollar industry, which essentially exists to manage symptoms. Because if you actually fix root problems, if you got rid of the problem, you'd be out of a job.
Yeah.
Now, in the kingdom, that is our purpose. Fix problems, make situations better, leave people in a better state, and move on.
Right? Yeah, work yourself out of a job.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So that's how it's fundamentally changed my approach. Just thinking of two different examples that will help illuminate this a little further. My second consulting gig when I was still in South Africa. So I finished my work with this guy, and then I got hired for another year to go and do very similar work for someone else. But now I'd had almost a year doing this work under my belt, and I could speak to the problems a lot more specifically and a lot more directly with a lot more authority. And so when I went into this coaching event, I didn't have to convince the owner of that company that he was the problem, quote unquote. He already came in from our, from our sales conversations, knowing I want to take responsibility. And so the cool thing was we started examining some of the relational issues he was having in his team. And he was just trying to keep the peace. He was just trying to keep everyone, kind of keep all the balls up in the air, just juggle everything. And as a result of the work we did, he actually sat down, distanced himself, looked at what was really going on, and made the necessary changes and adjustments kind of structurally to the team. So he'd just been firefighting. And suddenly he went, okay, I need to, that person's in the wrong position. That person needs to go over there. That person who's been over there needs to go down here. And so he made those changes and adjustments at root level, which were painful and incisive in the moment.
Right.
But in the long run, that company is thriving.
Wow.
And it literally resolved the relational issues that he had in his team permanently. And so when I speak about a kingdom change and transformation powerhouse, he invested 20% of his time. Well, actually, he invested 80% of his time on the 20% that matters for a couple of months. Yes, it was hard work, and it was the work he didn't want to do because it got ugly. He had to confront people. He had to confront his own failure, his own sin, his own negligence, and not wanting to take responsibility in certain areas. But he went there, he did that, made the hard calls, walked into some conflict, with open eyes, put up with the screaming and the fussing and the fighting. But after that, there was peace. You know how Matthew 5 says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God? That's
Right.
what he did. And as a result of that, he created a foundation in his company that God has seriously blessed.
Wow.
And so I've seen that actually carry over into the coaching work I do now. And this is a really cool additional dimension, but I got to walk with someone a few years ago who had been struggling in one area of her life, as it turned out, for 40 years. And
Wow.
she hadn't been able to get breakthrough in this area of her life. She was just worn out. She was frustrated. She was tired. She was deeply wounded. She was hurt. And having had this foundation principle so deeply established in me, it allowed me in the moment, as I was just asking God, like, what's going on here? What's going on here? What does she need in order to break free? God used that revelation. I said it's an upgrade to the way you think, and it will completely change and transform the way you think. Because God, again, he said, hey, don't look at things the way they are. There are symptoms presenting here, but that's not the real issue. And so she had been stuck for 40 years fighting symptoms and issues. And then God went, okay, there's a root to this. And by the way, this is what the root is. And so he showed me that in her case, there was, she had been looking at her childhood and at her past, and she had seen certain things. But God went, no. Again, you were just looking at the symptoms. This is the one thing that really happened. And she'd never seen that before. And as soon as God highlighted what had actually happened, she was able to look from the symptoms and from the bad fruit she was experiencing over to the real cause of this thing. We were able to pray through that thing, and a 40-year-old issue was done and dealt with by God's power in a matter of days. It was just gone.
Wow. That's incredible. When you give up, when you let go and let God work how he wants to work rather than trying to control the situation, which I like to be in control of my life. I like to think that I am. And it's not fun to let go, because you feel that out of control feeling like you felt in the avalanche. But when the avalanche is God, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And, again, like I said earlier, if you leave out the relational side of God, that God is a loving father who really does know you. He really is sovereign. He really is all-knowing, and not in a distant, far removed kind of way, but in a very personal, intimate way. So I lost my dad over a decade ago, and I didn't have a great relationship for the last 10 years of his life. So I don't know what it's like to have a good dad I can rely on. But if anyone has had a good dad that they can go to, and, dads who have wisdom and have life experience and have insight, and it's that kind of thing on, exponential steroids with God, to think of God that way and to go, oh yeah, okay. The humility piece and the control thing is saying, I am limited. I don't know everything, and I can't figure everything out in my own strength. But if you have this dad in God who does know, and he's trustworthy and he's safe and he's reliable, and you can go to him and go, hey, I'm struggling in this area, and I think I might not be seeing things clearly. Can you show me what you see? That's when it gets really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. You've talked about how the foundation's principle works in business.
Yeah.
Can it be applied to all areas of life?
Absolutely. I believe that 100%. I haven't seen it applied in every area of life yet, and I don't think I ever will, but I can give you some examples if you want of how I've seen it applied.
Go for it. I'd love to hear it.
I suffered through some fairly bad depression and some fairly intense panic attacks for years. And so it was a real mess. I mentioned a while ago, 2009, graduated from business school, no clue whatsoever as to what to do with my life, but had this strong desire for purpose. And that was painful. Not having purpose, knowing God had a purpose for me. My parents had just separated because my dad was an alcoholic and he just wasn't looking to change anything. My mum needed to get my little sister out of that toxic home environment. And so I'd grown up in Germany, was studying in the UK, had considered moving back to Germany, but suddenly Germany wasn't an option anymore because it wasn't safe. It wasn't a home anymore. There was nothing to go back to. I had a major porn addiction at the time, and I was just, depressed, fearful, anxious, had no hope, had a lot of guilt and shame over a couple of things I'd done, including the porn addiction, and that I wasn't walking out of it. And so it was just a huge, disgusting basket of just mess, right? And it actually got worse. So God started drawing me closer to him. But what happened is all of these issues started to get worse. So I had an encounter with God and I experienced his love physically, but at the same time, these issues got worse. And so I would have times when I would have to leave the office, run to my apartment, just close the door, and I would curl up in the fetal position and just shake with fear and anxiety. And here's what God did, applying that foundation's principle again. Everything I just described, very relatable, I think, for a lot of people. The hard truth is, it's not your ultimate reality. It's a symptom you're experiencing, right? And so I would cry out to Jesus to come and save me from that. And he often would. But then Jesus, as only Jesus could, he then very clearly tells you what your responsibility is and how you need to walk out of it. And so through my spiritual father at the time, and who was my boss and a mentor, I was speaking to him about a lot of this stuff. And he just gave me this workbook by some old Welsh preacher, and it was incredible. It was called The Battle of the Mind. And that's where God said, your issue is in your mind. So that was the first personal breakthrough in this area where God goes, you've got issues over here. The problem is the way you think. Romans 12. So that was God's root cause assessment at a high level. You're fighting all of this stuff. You're trying to manage your anxiety. You're trying to manage your addictions. You're trying to manage the guilt and the shame. You're trying to do all of this stuff, and it's wearing you out. So remember, 80-20, I was spending 80% of my time on the 20%. It's like you keep picking apples, hoping that they won't grow back, but they grow back. So that's what I was doing. And it was wearing me out, and I was done. And so that's where Jesus said, after pulling me out of a panic attack, you got yourself into this. You know the truth, you're not believing it. And so he said, the reason why you're experiencing all of this is because you're believing lies. So he took me from the behavior, which is a result, down to the belief level, which is the root. And he said, you can have a bad root, you can have a good root. Bad fruit, bad root. Good root, good fruit. So if you have bad fruit, this is a very simple, practical exercise for anyone. If you're experiencing bad fruit, undesirable behavior, undesirable results in your business, in your marriage, take responsibility. And this is what it looks like. Recognize that bad fruit is always tied to a bad root, and that is unbelief. You're believing lies. Even if it's just that you're not fully aligned with God's purpose. Where there's a lack of redemptive revelation, you perish, or people cast off restraint. And so that's what God showed me. You're in porn because you believe a lie. And so I was like, okay, God, this is hard because I just want you to take this stuff away from me. And Jesus was going, I want you to grow and to change and transform your mind so that you can be changed and transformed. So let me show you the lies you're believing. And so that's where that foundations principles are so cool, because they are transferable. It's not, this is a method for addiction recovery. No, this is a principle that applies regardless of what you're talking about.
Right.
And so God went, yeah, so you believe in lies. These are the lies you're believing, and this is the truth. So you go from a bad route, you change that, and that's the work you do. You do 80% of the work on those 20% beliefs, and you focus on that. And so this is what it looked like for me. I wanted Jesus to take away all of the symptoms, the panic, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame I was experiencing. He said, I want you to start actively focusing on the truth. And that was hard, man. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't fun, because I would walk, into a similar situation. I would get triggered. Satan would accuse me, whatever. I would start feeling the panic rise up in my heart. I'd be like, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And he'd be like, dude, breathe. Remember what I told you? Don't go back into unbelief. What's the truth? And I would start like shouting and yelling, like, don't tell me what to believe kind of thing. He's like, just focus on the truth. Because I was scared, I just wanted what was coming at me to go away. And he's like, no, I need you to push through this physically. I need you to focus your mind. And my mind was so unfocused. And God gave me some very basic truths. And here's the absolute kicker. This is why I said the foundations principle isn't just 80-20. It's more like 95-5. He didn't give me, we know from the Bible that we're supposed to defeat lies with the truth, and we stand firm against the enemy by holding on to the truth. But what most Christians do, and that's this, it's heartbreaking. We are fighting all of these battles with 10,000 different Bible verses. We have a Bible verse for everything. But what you're doing is you're fighting the symptoms with Bible verses. And so God showed me, for example, the reason why you're in anxiety, the reason why you're in guilt and shame, the reason why you're in pornography, all of this stuff, it's all tied to 2 or 3 core truths. So I don't want you to remember 10 different Bible verses. I want you to understand and hold on to 2 or 3 core truths. And you do that at the foundational level. And actually, the way to get out of pornography is not to focus on that and not to constantly fight the lust with the truth. It's to go down deep. And for me, it was, I didn't believe I was loved. And I believed that in order to be loved, I had to perform. So those were the 2 big lies that God identified for me. And he was like, here's the opposing truth. And the way you get out of all of this stuff, 95-5, you don't focus on any of it. You focus on those 2 truths. And that is real faith. And that was really hard, because I wanted to, Jesus almost went like, yeah, I know you're going to screw up again. I know you're going to backslide. But when that happens, pick yourself up, get your mind back on the truth, and keep going. And so as a result, panic attack gone. And I'm, for the sake of time, condensing my story, but panic gone, anxiety gone, guilt gone, shame gone. The last time I had a guilt or shame related panic attack was 2.5 years ago.
Wow.
18 months ago. Been, porn and addiction free for 5 years.
Amazing.
And so it works. And the great thing is, Jesus said, my burden is light and my yoke is easy. He doesn't want us to have to fight 24/7 with all of these Bible verses. He just goes, no. I want to show you the 1 or 2 things you do need to focus on. And when you do that, that's that foundations principle in practice.
Mhm. Was there a specific, like a single Bible verse that you held on to when you tried to focus on truth to fight through that, or
Yeah.
like in reality, like how did that go down for you in the moment?
The one that was really personal to me is Jesus coming out of the Jordan after being baptized. This is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased, and just having God apply that to me. But the thing in terms of a discipline that helped me on a daily basis was actually John 15 about the vine. And, Jesus talks about if we stay connected to him, then you're going to bear much fruit. And I kept coming back to that, or rather the Holy Spirit kept bringing me back to that for years. Because as someone who is very performance oriented and performance driven, because God's made me that way, I would get frustrated with not seeing the results immediately. So I would start focusing on the results again, instead of focusing on what actually drives the results. And God would constantly remind me, like, dude, you're not responsible for the fruit. You are responsible for staying connected. And the way you stay connected to me is by focusing on that truth. And that's another, go.
It's so easy to focus on the end result. Like I was just talking recently about building habits. You do a habit a couple times and you don't see the result that you want. It's easy to give up because it's like, I don't see what I'm working for. And you have to keep putting in the reps, keep going over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
I think James Clear in Atomic Habits said that, I'm paraphrasing here, our results are the compound effect of the habits that we build. Something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm paraphrasing. I know I butchered how he said that, but essentially, as you put in the time, you do the reps, you create that habit and stick to it in spite of not seeing a change. Yeah. You become an overnight success, essentially. Like all of a sudden the change happens and it's there.
Yeah, and I think that's something people do need to understand, right? The guy who completely transformed his team with this foundations principle, the revelation that God gave him, he went through, I think, a 9-month period of change and adjustment. So it doesn't happen overnight. Yes, it is 80-20. Yes, it is immensely powerful. So it's not going to happen overnight. But the cool thing is, when you, like you say, when you are just faithful to what you need to do, you don't focus on the results, you focus on the changes you need to make. 2 things happen. First of all, sooner or later, like you said, suddenly there will be a breakthrough, there will be results. And the key thing is that those results will be sustainable. So I'll give you one of my current struggles, which is quite interesting. God's been speaking to me for about 9 months, 10 months, about giving up coffee. And that's the last of my vices, right? But coffee has to go in my life, okay? And when he first showed me, I was like, okay, yes, I'm ready to do this. It's the gym analogy, right? New Year's resolution, like, yeah, I'm pumped, I'm motivated, I'm excited. I went for 3.5 months, no coffee, felt great, okay? And then my body was loving it. And often our body is way ahead of us in terms of our development than our mind is. And suddenly my mind kicked in. I was like, oh man, I'd love to just go and sit in a cafe, reward myself, good flat white, good cappuccino kind of thing. Yeah. And I went right back into drinking coffee again. And then you start this hard work, right? And I made exactly the same mistake that most people do. I focused on the results. I focused on the fruit. I was like, every time I had the urge and the desire to drink coffee, I was like, no, mustn't drink coffee. No, mustn't drink coffee. Didn't work. It doesn't work. Here's where it becomes really powerful, though, because just recently God was reminding me of the foundations principle. Why do you want to drink coffee? What's really going on there? Coffee is just a symptom. what are you really looking for? Oh, okay, when I drink coffee, it doesn't just give me a boost in energy, but actually it does something to me hormonally. It triggers something in my reward center, so there's a dopamine hit, but it also, in my case, it gives me like a short flood of serotonin, and serotonin is that I feel good about life in the future, right?
Yeah.
So what am I looking for? I'm looking for a bit of hope. I'm looking to feel good. So I'm looking for something that's good. That's a good desire, but I'm looking for it in the wrong place. And so the way to fix coffee is not by selling the coffee machine and by, fighting really hard against the urge. The way to fix it is to go down to the root, to the foundation. And that is, okay, I'm looking for love right now. I'm looking for a serotonin boost. I'm looking for a dopamine boost. Now I can go to God and say, okay, God, how do you want to meet that in me? So this might sound a little bit like weird to some people because it's like, no, it's discipline. It's willpower, make the choice and stick to it. Like, yeah, that might work for some things in certain cases for a certain amount of time. I'm not saying it never works, but that is you and your own effort and strength.
It has to be a deeper why.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, I've seen God lift some massive mountains in my life by just focusing on the truth that he loves me. And if we had more time, I could tell you, but it's stuff that hadn't, Jesus was like, just focus on the fact that I love you. I was like, but it's got nothing to do with what I'm going through right now. Why are you telling me to focus on the fact that you love me? I was like, because that's your deepest desire and that's your greatest need. And everything that you're doing right now that you're looking for is flowing out of that unmet need. I was like, okay.
Doesn't make sense, but okay. No. I know we're running short on time here, and I don't want to keep you up or too far into the early morning there, but if I can ask you one more question, do you have time for one more question? Okay.
Absolutely.
How does somebody go about finding that foundational truth for them to hold on to and apply the foundation principle in their everyday life?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you mentioned habits, because there isn't a certain amount of work we do need to do. First of all, let's talk posture really quickly. You need to be decisive, and you need to make space and time in your daily routine, in your schedule, to do the work that you do need to do. Okay, so that would mean, first of all, applying this foundations principle. You need to set aside some time to get clear on what the symptoms in your life are and what the root causes are. The way I would always suggest is just ask God. Now, some people say, I don't know how to hear from God. God's got a way of getting through to you. And it might just be that he sends someone to you, you have an epiphany. So if you're struggling at work, for instance, if you've got similar issues to the ones I described earlier, I would suggest block out some time in your calendar to just spend time with God and with this understanding and say, okay, Father, I understand there are results and there are causes. There's fruit and there's a root. So I understand this. Please apply this to my situation. Help me recognize which is which. Then when I understand what the root is, always understand there's always a belief attached. There's always revelation missing. So then you can go, okay, God, what's the limiting belief? What might even be the wrong belief, the unbelief in this area? And what revelation do I need? So it's almost like there's a workshop part to this where you do your initial workup. It's like you wanting to get fit. You would go and get a personal workup done by a personal trainer who would create a workout plan for you. Mm-hmm. And then forming habits is about consistency. It's not necessarily about the amount of work you do. It's about doing it every single day.
Right.
And so that's the thing for me. One of my personal disciplines still to this day is I get up early, and for the first hour and a half of my day, and this is my personal discipline, so I wouldn't put this on anyone else, but it's what God has given me. I try to focus on nothing else than the fact that God loves me. If I don't do that, day usually doesn't go too well, but if I do
Wow.
that, so, and that's just maintenance work right now, but that's how I would suggest going about it. Does that answer the question?
It does. It absolutely does. Yeah, people always want the easy answer, but I mean the truth is there is no easy answer. Everything is a deep work, real change, deep work, and deep work is super hard and not always fun.
But you mentioned the reps part, and there's a very clear link between physical training and working out and spiritual training. The way you get strong physically is through resistance training.
Uh-huh.
So why would it work any differently in your spiritual life?
Yeah.
God makes you strong by putting you through resistance. And that means, I used to ask him, why can't you just take this issue away from me? And I understand now because I would have been underdeveloped. Sure.
Right.
So imagine this, like you're in the gym. God wants to build you up. God spiritually wants you to be jacked. He wants you to be able to just bench that weight and throw the weight and pick up the weight. And he wants you strong and healthy and capable and functional, spiritually speaking. But it's like God walks you into his spiritual gym and he stands you in the center of the squat rack and he puts the weight on there. And you're like, hey, you've prayed all this stuff like, God, I want to grow. I want to mature. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better leader. And he's like, right, let's go. Let's lift some weights. And as soon as the resistance starts, you're like, oh, this is heavy. No, screw that. And you try to throw off the weight. That's what most of us do. But if you understand that God works just the way bodybuilding, physical training works, through resistance training, that's the definition of strength, is the ability to withstand resistance or to push against resistance, then you can lean into it. And that's the best bit of advice I can give you. It's just like lean into that, embrace the training. And like you said, don't focus on, I want to be able to, squat, 350 pounds. Focus on the reps that will get you there. Focus on those small bite-sized pieces and leave the results to themselves. They'll come if you do that basic stuff.
Yep. Wow. I was hoping for something fun and easy, but none of that here. Oh, that's great. That's fantastic, man. So what kind of people do you work with in your coaching? If somebody out there is hearing this and is interested in what you have to say and they're interested in reaching out and working with you, what kind of people do you work with? Or what are you looking for?
Well, overall, what God has called me to in terms of specific stuff, I help people discover God's blueprint for their life. That's what I love to do. It's very intimate, personal, one-on-one work, very bespoke, but it's discovering your purpose. And right now I work with coaches who are very purpose-driven, who are kingdom-minded, who believe that they have a greater purpose and a greater assignment to being in coaching than just to help people get transformational results. So I help these kingdom-minded coaches finally step into their God-given purpose with personal blueprints. So that's what I do right now. That's who I work with. So it's about connecting people to the purpose and the people and the provision that God has stored up for them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Where can somebody find you to follow what you're doing and to reach out with you if they want to connect?
So I'm on Facebook. That's where I spend a lot of my time. Just punch in James Bierbrauer. You'll find me there. Blueprintsacademy.com. Blueprints Academy is the name of my company. That's where you'll find me as well. And those are probably the best two places to start. So if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out, probably just, hit me up on Facebook, shoot me a DM, and then we can get the ball rolling.
Awesome. I'll have those links in the show notes. So people can find you there. I appreciate you joining me
Thanks, man.
tonight on my time, early morning your time. It's, I know, a sacrifice, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been really cool, and I appreciate the opportunity to just share some stuff that God's put on my heart, and hope that this speaks to people and adds value.
Well, I don't see how it hasn't. I've got a page full of my own notes. Anybody who's listening had to at least have one note that they can take away from it and make a change. So thanks again, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Hang out for just a second, and we'll
man.
Chat just a little bit. All right, guys, I appreciate y'all joining me tonight for another live stream. If you are catching the video, the audio will come out on Friday, which is 5 days from now. Just do the hard work. I know, we talked a little bit about there is no quick and easy fix. You need to do the hard work to find that purpose, to find the foundational truth that God has given you, that God gives each and every one of us to build your life on, to transform your life so that you in turn can help other people transform theirs. We are called to serve. Jesus was a servant. We're called to be like Jesus. That means serving others with our gifts, our passions, our talents, everything God's given us. We're called to serve with that. So go serve and do good work.